A very good afternoon to all of you present here. I, Dr. Krishna Sinhamahapatra, welcome you to the fourth lecture of the lecture series on literary theory post-World War II, which is included in your net set English syllabus. As it's the fourth lecture, we have already proceeded through various topics, beginning from the idea of literature, idea of literary criticism, literary theory. We discussed new criticism, formalism. We discussed structuralism, post-structuralism, postmodernism. And now we will be taking up the next topic, which we have started yesterday already, and we will continue with that. You can find my details on the screen, which you can kind of take a note of. For example, you can kind of take a note of my channel through which you can connect with me after the lecture. During the lecture, if you have any doubts, you can put it on the chat box, which is available for live chatting, and we can take up those questions for further discussion. So I can see some of the students here with the name Dream Police. So hello, good afternoon. So lecture 4, as I said, is again going to be a continuation of lecture 1, 2, 3. We have started psychoanalytic criticism in lecture 3. If you have followed lecture 3, then you will see that we have started discussion on it. We will carry that forward and then take up further theories for discussion. So, psychoanalytic criticism, some points we had discussed yesterday, like it is a criticism or theory, which is a method or concept or form, which is influenced by the tradition of Sigmund Freud. And psychoanalytic reading has been practiced since the early development of psychoanalysis, and it developed into a heterogeneous interpretive tradition. Heterogeneous bringing in the idea that there are different colors to it, there are different layers to it. It's not just of one texture. Again, it adopts the methods of reading employed by Freud and later theorists to interpret texts. It argues, hello sir, I see Professor Sandipan Munde online. So good afternoon. So it argues that literary texts like dreams express the secret unconscious desires and anxieties of the author, and that a literary work is a manifestation of the author's own neurosis. So it's a manifestation of the author's own thoughts. So it talks about the inner brain, it talks about the repressed emotion, it talks about subconscious desires, and how the way the author is writing is a kind of reflection of or is kind of an interpretation, just the way we talk about dreams. So one may psychoanalyze a particular character with a literary work, but it usually is assumed that all characters are projections of the author's psyche. So whatever is going on in the author's mind, consciously or unconsciously or subconsciously, comes into the form of his writing. Now, this is where we had stopped yesterday, which is Sigmund Freud's models of the mind. So according to Freud, language plays a very important role in expressing what? In expressing the hidden feelings, which we usually don't disclose before others, the desires and the emotions which are there in our mind, which sometimes we try to hide from people around us. However, Freud wants to say that language kind of plays an important role in expressing these hidden things which we are hiding from the world. So he argues that language and the unconscious are closely related to each other. So you will see that when you are having a discussion with your friend and you are perhaps thinking about a movie, now all of a sudden you were actually kind of discussing with that particular person, but unconsciously somehow what happens, you kind of take that person's name, or you are discussing, you are talking with one friend and you take somebody else's name about whom you were thinking. So this is how Freud is trying to say that language and the unconscious are closely related to each other. He said that our unconscious portion of the mind consists of several desires, sex drives, fears, dreams, and anxieties, which were not expressed in a direct way because our society does not accept such norms. So all of us know that we are in a society. Human beings are social beings. And if we have to come across as a responsible citizen of the country, as a responsible member of the society, we will have to follow certain societal norms. And when we are following these societal norms, some way or the other, we have to somewhere down the line suppress certain feelings which perhaps we wouldn't have done if we were not following those social customs or social codes. So this is what Freud is trying to say, that the unconscious portion of the mind has these several desires and kind of dreams and anxieties and fears in our mind, which because of social codes, because of the kind of policing, moral policing, which is all the time going on around us, we are not able to express, right? So Freud denies this idea because he said that unsaid, hidden and deeper feelings, emotions and desires can be revealed through language and its different varieties. So he is saying that these things which are inside our mind, though they don't come out directly, but somewhere down the line, somehow they find a way through language in or through its different varieties, right? Now we were discussing the idea of id, ego and superego in the previous lecture as well. And it is crucial to understand his concept, Freud's concept. So we will be kind of understanding it a little more. So we were saying id is the immoral side of our mind, human mind. You can see the picture which is depicting a human mind. So the immoral aspect of our mind. Yesterday we were taking up the example of having ice cream. And here you see that the example which is given is that I need to eat right this second. That is, I want to eat right now. So now if, for example, you're in a meeting or you're in a classroom or you are delivering a lecture or you're listening to a lecture wherein you're not permitted to eat. And if that is when your mind is, kind of really feeling greedy and wants to eat something, then that is something which is not, highly moral to do, right? So you are having that kind of thought. And every one of us have different kinds of such thoughts. Nobody can say that, I'm always kind of a saint. Wherein I don't have any such thought that, I want to go out right now, though you are in the lecture, you want to go and watch a movie, or you are, kind of writing down your thesis or writing down your paper, and you want to do something else which is not related to study. So all the time these thoughts come in our mind, right? Which are kind of directing us towards a path which is not moral. Okay, so I see Harshvardhan here. Good afternoon. So then we also have another part of our mind, which is the superego, wherein the superego is giving us some moral instructions and telling us that you can't do that because you're in the middle of an important meeting. For example, right now you want to go and watch a movie in a theater, and nothing wrong in that because it's so hot right now. People will kind of feel like grabbing a seat in an air-conditioned hall and enjoy a movie. But then your superego is trying to say that your net examinations are near and you can't do that because you will have to study and your basics and ideas should be clear. Right. So this is how there is always a kind of tension which is there between the id and the superego, wherein you are kind of deciding which way to go, whether you are going to go in the immoral or the moral way. And this balance is kind of done by the term which is ego. So you see a judge's kind of image over here, and the final decision and the judgment is taken by the ego, which is balancing the id and the superego, and is perhaps saying that, okay, fine, you are hungry, so you can have the food in the next 10 minutes when you are going to have a break. Or for example, if you are thinking of going for a movie right now, your mind will tell you, okay, fine, finish these concepts which we are discussing, and then you can take a break for some time perhaps. So this balancing comes from the ego. So this is the idea which we get about human personality, and it is there in every one of us, and it's an important measure of what kind of personality we have. So according to Freud, the human behavior is formed through an interaction between three components of the mind, that is id, ego and superego, wherein the id, according to Freud, is one of the most important parts of the human personality, based on what? Based on primitive, that is the old and very, very basic impulses like hunger, like thirst, the desire for gratification that all of us really, love to be loved by people, love to be admired by people. So this is something which is primitive. This is something which is there right from the beginning when human beings have started living, and anger. So these basic primitive impulses are kind of coming from what? From id. So humans are born with their id, and it allows them to acquire their basic needs. Next comes the superego. It is related to the social or the moral values that an individual inculcates as he matures. So it acts as an ethical constraint on behavior and helps an individual to develop his conscience. So now this is very interesting, that the superego will not be kind of constant in whichever society you go. It is going to be kind of designed, it is going to be influenced by the social and moral values which you have been a part of as you were growing. So the superego of a person growing in a jungle and a superego of a person growing in a city will be a little different, because it is an understanding of the social and moral values which are around us, right? So it kind of gives us an understanding of what is morally correct, what is not morally correct, right? So that is what the superego kind of tells us. And then comes the role of the ego. So ego is the logical and the conscious part of the mind which is associated with the reality principle. This means it balances. The word balances is very important over here. It balances the demands of id and superego in the context of real life situations. So a balance is kind of brought between the id and the superego, and the ego kind of decides how we are going to behave in that particular situation. Now, Freud's another concept is his concept of three levels of mind. Now, what do we mean by the three levels of mind? So the first level of consciousness is known as the conscious state, and this refers to our immediate awareness that you are experiencing as you read this. So the conscious mind, wherein we are conscious, we are aware of the things which are going on around us. So that is the conscious mind. The next level of consciousness is the subconsciousness, or the subconscious, or the preconscious. It is the stuff from which dreams are made of. So we get the first one is the level of conscious mind. Then the next level is the idea of the subconscious or the preconscious, and the final level is the level of consciousness which is known as the unconscious. So the final level of consciousness is termed as the unconscious level. The next level of consciousness is termed as the subconscious or preconscious, and the first level of consciousness is known as the conscious state. So herein you see the chart wherein the first part, so our human mind is just like an iceberg. If you have seen an iceberg, I don't know, but many of you have watched the movie Titanic, and you must be having the idea of iceberg and how some part of the iceberg is only to be seen through our naked eyes. So we can only see some part of the iceberg which is above the water. We cannot see the entire structure of the iceberg which is there underwater. And that is the reason why different ships or kind of sailing bodies, they are not able to kind of understand the capacity of that particular iceberg, the might of that iceberg, the kind of strength of the iceberg, and they come and hit the iceberg and they get shipwrecked. You can see some images of some ships which have been shipwrecked, right? That is the ships which kind of were broken down because of their meeting with the iceberg. So human mind is also just like this, wherein some part of it is visible, some part of it is understood by everyone, which is there right at that moment, which is a conscious mind. And then comes the pre-conscious mind, which is just kind of below the layer of the things which we are just now experiencing. And then there are certain kind of thoughts and emotions which go down, very down, wherein these are made up of thoughts, memories, and primitive instinctual desires that are buried deep within ourselves, far below our conscious awareness. So it might be that we are not even aware that these thoughts are there in our mind, and these are there deep inside our unconscious mind. The things which are there in our mind, we don't give much of importance, is just down the conscious level, is the preconscious stage, which comes across to us or which we meet in the form of a dream. For example, you are going to visit a new place and you are very excited, and you don't know much about the place, but then when you go off to sleep, you are dreaming about that place because of certain things which you perhaps know. And the conscious mind is the conscious mind which talks about that particular moment, the things which you know at that particular moment. And unconscious, as we discussed, things which we even don't know that we know, right? So this is how Freud gives 3 levels of mind. Dreams play a very important role in Freudian theory. So a significant part of Freud's psychoanalytic theory deals with the dreams and their role in human life. And Freud believed that dreams are royal roads that lead us to our unconscious mind. So the things which are buried very, very down in our mind, we are not aware of it. Perhaps dreams will be able to take us to that place. Dreams are reflection of our repressed desires hidden in our subconscious minds. And dreams are more like the symbolic fulfillment of human desires or wishes. So there are many things which we want. For example, I have cleared NET examination. I've been selected as the assistant professor in one of the universities. So these dreams are, these ideas, these thoughts, these hopes are there in our mind. And when we are really thinking about it a lot, sometime what happens, we go off to sleep and we kind of realize, we kind of feel that experience through the form of our dream. So dream plays an important role in Freud's theory. Another important aspect of psychoanalytic criticism is the concept of Oedipus complex and Electra complex, which many of you have heard, but again we need to kind of revisit it to have a better understanding of it. So you can see this diagram wherein we are seeing that, and we see it every time around us in our house. We have experienced it when we were a child. So usually during the transitory phase of 3 to 6 years, when a child is growing up, there is this intimate feeling, or there is this intense feeling which a son feels for his mom, that is his mother, and he always seeks the mother's attention and wants to hear something good from the mother. Similarly, it is the girl who seeks or wants the affection of the father and tries to kind of get that attention at any cost. So the Oedipus complex is a concept developed by Sigmund Freud. So the idea is based on Greek myth of Oedipus. You can actually read the story of Oedipus to get a better understanding of it. Freud used the Oedipus complex to explain the formation of the superego, which is there in a boy or a male child who is growing up. So a boy wants the mother's attention, the mother's affection, the mother's love, and is highly attached to a mother. And this is due to the Oedipus complex, which is there, which is a part of the superego of the boy. Now, with relation to Oedipus complex, there came to the fore another idea, the idea of Electra complex, which is again proposed by Carl Jung and in 1913. According to the theory, a girl starts competing with the mother for her father's affection. Now, there are various novels, stories, short stories in literature wherein you get the reference of Oedipus complex or Electra complex. Because at the end of the day, whenever we are studying any piece of literature wherein there are characters The writer always tries to create characters who seem to be lifelike, who seem to be people whom we see around us. And as a result, the psychological development of the character is given importance. And many a times, things which are not kind of visible through apparent eyes, we have to do, kind of critical analysis of that to understand the kind of psychological aspect which is highlighted. For example, if you have gone through Lawrence's Sons and Lovers, you will see there is immense influence of Oedipus complex, and we can have a detailed understanding of this complex if we read Sons and Lovers or make a psychoanalytic study of Sons and Lovers. And since you are preparing for your NET examination, it is again an important novel. You can always go back to it, read the characters, and how this idea of a kind of need for mother's affection is important and is highlighted in this particular novel. Now we are going to talk about Lacan and Lacanian psychoanalysis. So Jacques Lacan, in the 1900s, in the mid to late 1900s, called for a return to Freud's work. However, he introduced a new way of envisioning it, so a renewed focus on the unconscious and greater attention paid to language. Now, there are three key concepts of Lacanian psychoanalysis that set it apart from Freud's original talk therapy. And what are these distinctive features? The distinctive features are one, the real, the symbolic order, and the mirror stage. So, Lacan talks about these three stages or these three parts. So, number one, Lacan theorized the real is actually the most foundational level of the human mind. Then he talks about the symbolic order. So our desires and emotions live in the symbolic order. That is where they are interpreted if possible. So the real is the most fundamental level of the human mind, which is there at that moment. And then comes the symbolic order. And in the symbolic order, we have the idea of the desires and the emotions which are running through our mind. And then we come to the third and most important stage according to Lacan, that is, there is an important stage of development not covered by Freud called as the mirror stage. So this aptly named stage is initiated when infants, that is, as the babies are growing up into children, they look into a mirror at their own image. Most infants become fascinated, that is, they are shocked and surprised with the image they see in the mirror and may even try to interact with it. Now, in the age of selfies, perhaps this idea and concept of mirror has evolved. However, the idea is when the infant is first seeing his or her image on the mirror, he or she may even try to interact with it because he is not even aware of the fact that the image which he is or she is seeing on the mirror or in that particular handset is actually his or her own image. So that realization is not there till he reaches that day wherein he understands that. So eventually they realize that the image that they are seeing is of themselves. Once they realize this key fact, they incorporate what they see into their sense of I or sense of self. So this is the stage which gives birth to the concept of I, the concept of yourself, that is the concept of I as an individual. So this is what gives rise to that. So at this young stage, the image they see may not correspond to their inner understanding of their physical self, in which case the image becomes an ideal that they strive for as they develop. So it might be that the child, the infant is not really capable of understanding the intensity and the depth of it, his or her physical self. And hence this image which he or she sees in the mirror becomes an ideal, that is a kind of reference point, a kind of a model, a kind of ideal reality which he or she tries to strive, that is tries to get as he or she develops, right? So the mirror stage plays an important role in development of the sense of I or the sense of self in an individual. Then we also have to refer to Harold Bloom, who talks about this concept of anxiety of influence. What is that? So it is a type of literary criticism established by Bloom in 1973 in his book, The Anxiety of Influence, A Theory of Poetry. And what does it refer to? It refers to the psychological struggle of aspiring authors, whose aspiring authors means people who want to write, right? So psychological struggle of the aspiring authors. And what kind of struggle? The struggle to overcome the anxiety posed by the influence of their literary antecedents, that is the psychological struggle which is going on in the mind of an author for what? For overcoming the anxiety posed by the influence of their literary antecedents. So kind of how to overcome the influence of the writers who have written before me. So this anxiety is constantly there, anxiety of the influence of the people who have written works of literature before me comes into our mind always. The concept of noun Chomsky is also important, and Chomsky proposed that linguistics, or the study of language, should be included in the field of cognitive psychology since it involves mental processes. And additionally, he proposed the theory of universal grammar, which states language acquisition is innate or inborn as opposed to being learned. So what is Chomsky's concept of universal grammar? It states that language acquisition, that is the way we learn language, we acquire language, that is innate or inborn. So it is something which is inborn. And it is opposed, that is it goes against to being learned. So it goes against to being learned, right? So he proposed the theory of universal grammar, who Noam Chomsky, and he states that language acquisition is something inborn and it is opposed to being learned. And he talks about linguistics and study of language, how it should be included in the field of cognitive psychology, that is, it involves the mental processes. So how it is important. So we have discussed some of the important thinkers of psychoanalytic criticism, certain important concepts of psychoanalytic criticism, which are important for the purpose of NetSet, and which are also important in general in order to understand the concept of psychoanalytic criticism. Now, with these, we are going to move on to reader response theory. What is reader response theory? Now, as the name suggests, the name itself makes it very clear that this theory is going to talk about the response of the readers. And we have got reference to this theory while we were discussing other theories earlier as well. So reader response theory kind of comes into picture with response to other theories and their concepts, and hence we are going to try and understand what kind of equation it shares. So, reader response theory, primarily a German and American offshoot of literary theory, emerged or became prominent during 1960s in the West. Mainly as a reaction, this is important, to the textual emphasis of the new criticism of the 1940s. So, if we refer back to lecture number 2, wherein we have discussed new criticism in entire details. You will get all the theories and the concepts which we have discussed. You will see that constantly there has been this idea of negating the influence of the reader and the reader's influence We refer to the terms of interpretive fallacy, effective fallacy, and the kind of problems which arise when we give importance to the conception and the way the reader interprets. So the new critics, they constantly spoke about close reading. They spoke about reading a text without taking into account the influence of the writer, or that is the author, or the reader, or the world, or the society. So they are constantly talking about the textual analysis, which is the close reading, without giving importance to whom? Without giving importance to the reader. And reader response theory comes as an answer to the concepts propagated by new criticism. So it is a reaction, that is something which is against, or which is a kind of answer to the kind of theory which is propagated in the form of new criticism. So according to reader response criticism, the reader is the producer. What is the reader? The reader is the producer rather than a consumer of meanings. And this shows, or this brings us back to the idea of Barth's concept of the death of the author, which we discussed in yesterday's lecture. That is lecture number 3, wherein he talks about the death of the author and the birth of the reader. That is, once the text is written, it belongs to the world, and it is up to the interpretations of the people and how they are interpreting that particular text is going to be interpreted. So reader response criticism is kind of related to this fact that the reader is a producer rather than a consumer. Consumer means you are just consuming a product. For example, you are the consumer of the food which you are consuming. You are just eating, or you are just, kind of taking it in. Rather, it's not that. According to reader response theory, the reader is a producer. Why is the reader producer? Because the reader is producing interpretations. And the interpretations can never ever be exactly the same. There will be different interpretations of a particular text, and it is because of the fact that the meaning is produced in the mind of the reader. And it's not that the reader is only consuming the ideas, that is only kind of taking in the ideas which are there in that particular text. So the philosophical origins of reader response criticism can be traced back to the doctrine of phenomenology, wherein it talks about experience, whose foundations were laid by German philosopher Edmund Husserl. That is 1859 to 1938, his lifespan we can talk about. So it takes its origin from the doctrine of phenomenology, wherein phenomenology talks about the experience of a person. So the term phenomenon means appearance, and phenomenology is a philosophy of experience which does what? Shifts our attention from what? From the external world, attention of the external world, to the ways in which these objects appear to the human subject, and the subjective contribution to this process of appearing. That is the personalized contribution. It is not objective, it is subjective. That is, it is personalized way of interpreting things, personal way of experiencing certain things. So this is what phenomenology adds to it, and the idea of reader response criticism takes its origin from the idea of phenomenology, or the doctrine of phenomenology, wherein phenomenon is or means what? Appearance, and phenomenology is a philosophy of experience. There is also reference to hermeneutics, and it refers to the fact that it concerns what? Interpretation specially of biblical or literary texts. And the hermeneutic conception is given forward by Martin Heidegger. And this is also important in reader response criticism. It kind of takes these ideas from Heidegger, wherein it kind of plays a pivotal, that is an important role to the development of the reader response theory, especially his explanation of Dasein, or being there as a constituting a temporal structure of interpretative understanding, which is already engaged in the activity of interpretation. So the concept of Dasein, or the idea of being there, being an important part of the activity of interpretation. So reader response theory takes this idea from hermeneutics of Martin Heidegger. Now, reader response criticism does not denote any specific theory. It can range from the phenomenological theories of Wolfgang Iser, Roman Ingarden, both were faculty members at the University of Constance, Germany, to the relativistic analysis of Stanley Fish. So Stanley Fish is also again a very important thinker and theorist, who argues that the interpretive strategy of the reader creates the text. So how is the text created? The text is created by the interpretive power of the reader. There being no text except that which a reader or an interpretive community of readers creates. So for example, you get, I circulate a text with all of you, which is written in German. And I ask you to tell me what you have understood from that particular text, from that particular piece. You will not be able to tell me anything until and unless you have been trained in that language. Now, if I circulate with you a kind of a text which is written in English, and the English is very, very difficult, with bombarding words over there, and there is no help from the teacher, you are understanding it on your own. And there will be two students, student A and B, wherein A has got very good understanding of that text or that language, and hence is able to understand that text completely. And student B will not be able to understand much of it because he or she is not really trained in that language. So as a result, what happens is that though both of you, that is the student A and student B, get the same text or the same piece of literature to read, however, the text which kind of evolves out of the reading will be completely different for both of them, because it is based on the interpretive strategy, the ability, the capacity of interpreting a certain thing, a certain text. And it is completely dependent on the reader and the reader's ideas of, or the capacity of interpreting the text or decoding the text to understand the meaning. So, this is what Stanley Fish tries to say. Now, being both a reception aesthetic and a reception history, reader response criticism examines how readers realize the potential of a text and how readings change over course of history. So reception, or the way a text is interpreted, is very important in reader response theory. And hence, the readers realize the potential, the criticism examines how the potential of a text is actually determined by the reader of a text, and how the readings change over the course of history. Because reading will change, because the person who is reading, the reader is changing, and the reader's ability to understand, the reader's ability to deconstruct, the reader's ability to kind of decipher the meaning which is there is going to change and evolve. And with that, the idea of reader response criticism also changes. One can sort reader response theorists into three groups. What are they? Those who focus upon the individual reader's experience, that is the individualists. Those who conduct psychological experiments on a defined set of readers, that is the experimenters. And those who assume a fairly informed or uniform, that is similar, response by all readers, the uniformists. So basically, these divisions can be made of the different conception of response towards a text, and based on that, three groups can be created based on the ability and the capacity of understanding a particular text, and the differences and kind of uniqueness which is there in the different readers' interpretation. Hans Robert Jauss was a German theorist inspired by the phenomenological method of Husserl and Heidegger's hermeneutics, wherein we were discussing hermeneutics is about interpretation and mostly interpretation of biblical and literary texts. And it gave a historical dimension to reader-oriented criticism by developing a version of reader response criticism known as reception theory in his book, New Literary History. So this actually gives reference to the idea of Jauss. So I see Mr. Pradeep online. Thank you so much for your comment. So what does Jauss state? He exhorted, that is, he said that literature is a dialogic entity. So what kind of entity? It's a dialogic entity. What does dialogic mean? Dialogic means that a sort of dialogue is going on between what? Between the text and the reader. So a dialectic process of production and reception. And he added that there is always negotiation and opposition on the part of the reader. So he is trying to say that we are not just reading a text in a mechanical way. As we were saying, that a reader is not just a consumer who is consuming the product without his or her own interpretation or his or her own kind of approach towards that text, right? So he is stating that there is always a kind of dialogic or dialectic process which is involved, and it is kind of giving us the idea of the text through the production and reception and the constant give and take exchange which is going on in the process of reading. He talks about horizons of expectations. That is a term which he develops to explain how a reader's expectations or frame of reference is based on the reader's past experience of literature and what preconceived notions about literature the reader possesses. So again, you will see that somebody who doesn't have much idea of literature and is as given a piece of literature, or a student of literature, for example, if I give you a text to read and analyze and kind of I ask you to submit your understanding of that text, and I give that same text to somebody who is working in an IT company and who has never had much of interest in literature, the interpretation will completely change, because it's somewhere down the line what Jauss tries to say, the idea of horizons of expectations. That is the past experience, the way you are preparing for NATE, the way you are kind of trying to be updated about the different changes, the different developments in the field of literature. Your way of interpreting will be different from somebody who is not at all interested in this kind of reading or this exercise. So the renowned cultural theorist Stuart Hall is one of the main proponents of reception theory, and he developed it for media and communication studies from the literary and history-oriented approaches. Now, this conception or this idea of reception theory can be taken up or can be extended to different other fields of studies as well, and it has got a lot of implication in today's world. Next theorist whom we are going to discuss is Norman Holland. He who kind of makes use of psychoanalytic analysis for the process of reading. What did he do, or what was his idea? So he viewed the subject matter of a work as a projection of the fantasies that constitute the identity of its authors. So he is talking about the basic conception of psychoanalytic criticism, wherein it talks about the fact that the subject matter of a work or what is written is actually a projection or a result of the fantasies or the dreams or the imaginations that constitute or that is a part of the identity of that particular author. So this is what Holland is kind of reiterating for the people to understand. To him, reading is the encounter that is kind of meeting face to face between whom? Between the author, encounter between the authors and the reader's fantasies. So the imaginations, the fantasies, the dreams, the wildest dreams which are there in the author and in the reader's mind. So there is an encounter, there is a kind of meeting of these two entities or fantasies of these two entities. So the reader transforms the fantasy content that constitutes the process of interpretation. So in the process of interpretation, what happens? The reader transforms the fantasy content. That is, he brings in his way of interpretation of that text in order to reread the concept which is stated by the reader through his fantasy. He also declared that there is no universally determinate meaning of a particular text. So the idea of a universal meaning is kind of questioned, and is stated that it's not possible to have one such universal specific meaning of a particular text. Why? Because of this point wherein reading is not just a mechanical process. Reading is a process wherein there is encounter. That is a kind of exchange, a kind of meeting, a kind of understanding and give and take of what? Of the authors and readers' fantasies take place. So the reader transforms the fantasy content in the text as per his or her understanding, right? Now next is Wolfgang Iser, who drew heavily on the phenomenological aesthetics of Roman Ingarden and the writings of Hans Georg Gadamer, right? So he also talks about psychoanalytic criticism and his way of understanding of this particular theory. So to him, the literary work is not an object in itself, but an effect to be expounded. The text is the result of the author's intentional acts and it controls readers' responses. So what does he mean? In his work, The Act of Reading, a theory of aesthetic response, Iser posits that is, he states that all literary texts have leustillen, that is blanks, gaps and lacunae, which have to be filled in or concretized by the creative reader to interpret the text, right? So he is talking about the different blanks, gaps and lacunae which are there in a particular text and which have to be filled or which have to be kind of referred to, which have to be kind of dealt with in order to interpret that text or understand that particular text. The idea of implied reader, who is an implied reader, so it's a term used by Iser to describe a hypothetical reader of a text, means somebody who is not real, who is hypothetical reader of a text. Such a reader is a model or a role, kind of exact model of the kind of reader you look for. So the implied reader embodies all those predispositions necessary for a literary work to exercise its effect, predispositions laid down not by empirical outside reality, but by the text itself. So the implied reader embodies all those predispositions, that is, all those qualities which are necessary for a literary work to exercise, or which is needed by the literary work to have its effect laid down not by the kind of empirical outside, but by the text itself. And what is the actual reader? The actual reader is the one whose responses are colored by his or her accumulated personal experiences, one who receives mental images during the process of reading through the knowledge and experience of one's own. So the implied reader is the ideal or the model reader, and the actual reader is the reader who is actually reading the text, who is actually available in that world, is actually available at that particular moment, and who is kind of dealing with his or her accumulated personal experiences and mental images in order to deal with the process of reading. Right. So Iser also describes the process of first reading, that is a subsequent development of the text into a whole, and how the dialogue between the reader and the text takes place. So the concept of first reading is also highlighted by Iser. Next is Harold Bloom. He is a prominent Yale critic who has been noteworthy for his incorporation of Freudian conceptions of defense mechanisms into the realm of reader response theory. So Freud we just studied in psychoanalytic criticism. So he came up with the idea of anxiety of influence. We discussed Harold Bloom earlier as well while doing psychoanalytic criticism. Here also we are revising because he plays an important role in reader response theory. So which define the hitherto notion of influence, that it is direct or it's borrowing or assimilation materials from earlier writers. So Bloom calls a poet a belated one or FAB, who is motivated to compose a poem when his imagination is seized upon by a precursor, that is a particular person who wrote earlier to him, a writer or a poet. So while his imagination is seized by a work which is already there, the FAB has an Oedipal relationship with his or her precursor. That is a relationship ambivalent, that is which is ambiguous, mixed with admiration, hate, envy, and fear of precursor's encroachment. That is whether the precursor is influencing me or influencing the writer into the belated's imaginative space. So it talks about the influence of the previous writers on a particular author of that particular text. Now, the next writer or the theorist, Stanley Fish, he applies this method in the early work Surprised by Sin, The Reader in Paradise Lost. His thesis in this work is that Milton, so he, as you can see, Paradise Lost, it is about Milton, used a number of literary techniques intentionally to lead the reader into a false sense of security, whereupon he would effect a turn from the reader's expectations in order to surprise the reader with his own prideful self-sufficiency. So basically in this text, he is making a detailed study of Milton and his techniques which he has used. This is very important. Is there a text in this class which is again a compilation of essays by Fish, wherein he explains that members share a particular reading strategy, a particular way of reading, and each communal strategy creates the objective features of the text. Hence, no universal right or valid reading is possible. There will be different strategies by different communities, by different readers. So Fish defines his phenomenological approach as an analysis of developing responses of the reader in relation to the words as they succeed one another in time. So his theory is based on social construction of reality or knowledge. So how different members of the society, their concept of reality, their concept of truth is different, and it defines the way we are dealing with a particular text. So is there a text in the class, or is there a text in this class actually talks about Stanley Fish's way of dealing with the concept of, or the idea of communal strategy creates the objective features of a text. As a result, there is no universal right or valid reading. So as we have understood, reader response theory focuses on what? On the individual reaction and interpretation of a text by the reader, as it is proposed that only the reader can give a text sufficient meaning. So text's meaning is not just there in the text, but it is created by the reader and his interpretation. Now, each and every reader will interpret a text differently between readings depending on their intellect or knowledge of the history of which the text describes, mood, personal experiences, ideologies, and culture. So, the reader is an important aspect in this particular theory. What are the benefits? So, the text forces the reader to look beyond its words and search for the deeper meaning. As each reader interprets differently groups of readers form connections and understandings based on each other's perspectives or perceptions. As well, perspectives also change over time and therefore make meaning unstoppable or unstable. So it's something which is always evolving. We cannot say that finally we have made a final analysis of something. There will be new ways of interpreting it. There will be new shades of reality which will color the interpretation of this text in the upcoming days. So this theory is too subjective. That is, it talks about emotional feelings because it focuses on the reader's interpretation, therefore reader's bias. So this is the advantage which we are talking about, the benefit that it is always evolving. It is the reader's response, his way of understanding. And this part talks about the disadvantage. What is the disadvantage? That the theory is too subjective because personal feelings and emotions comes into play. Therefore, reader's bias and it ignores the actual meaning of the text, if there is one, because it's a question, that because there are different questions, different meanings. The meaning of the reader can misinterpret the text, and if the reader knows the author's interpretation, then the reader may not believe it, find fault in it, and completely disregard it. So, just like the different other theories, reader response theory also has certain questions. Like these questions are important because we talk about different perspectives and how it will enlighten different aspects of the story. Then where does the text have gaps of missing, or what brings in the indeterminacy in that particular story? At what point is a reader most connected to a text and why? Finally, there is this transactional reader response criticism by Louis Rosenblatt, and it talks about the fact that in the text and reader are equally needed to form meaning. She is profound like other critics in her area and believes that reader and text occurs a transaction based on personal associations. Readers use past experiences to base expectations of what is forthcoming in the text, and the transactional process allows the readers to create interpretations by using not only personal connection but the aesthetic response of that particular text. So with transactional criticism, or the transactional reader response criticism, we come to the end of the theory which we were discussing till now. And now the next topic which we are going to take up is feminism, and we are going to take that up in the next lecture lined up tomorrow. It will be an exclusive lecture on feminism, so be there tomorrow with me, wherein we are going to discuss the ideas, concepts of feminism, why it is important and how it is relevant, how it is still evolving, and the significance of studying that particular theory for the upcoming exam, that is your NET examination, which is just around the corner. So thank you so much, all of you, for being there with me. It was a wonderful session with all the interactions. So with everybody's greeting and the comments. Thank you. See you all tomorrow. Please join in and share your ideas as well to make the lecture a success. After the lecture, you can join with me on my channel, which is Krishna's Canvas. See you tomorrow. Have a great day. Thank you so much.